Alright, so welcome back to the channel. I have taken some time off because I've been a bit mentally and physically drained, and there are people out there serving in the military right now. There are people up all night in emergency rooms, but I couldn't get it together to just watch some movies and talk about them on camera. So go me. But anyways, we're here, we're back, and we're here to talk about what I have hailed the unofficial Juno trilogy. Now, I wanted to get really clickbaity with this and be like, the sequels of Juno that you never knew existed, but like, it felt really disingenuous because they're not, all right? Like, they're not. Spoiler warning for this video, they're not. What they are is they are movies that are similarly about the female experience, that are directed by Jason Reitmann, the same director as Juno, and written by Diablo Cody, the same writer of Juno. And you see a lot of the DNA of the issues that were explored in Juno explored in both Young Adult and Tully really, really well. So what I want to do today was kind of bring up why I feel like these other two movies, aside from Juno, are underappreciated, underrated, and really deserve your time. On top of that, I kind of want to highlight some of the connective tissue I noticed between these three movies. I'm not very good with character names. It's kind of my biggest Achilles heel. So a lot of this is going to be Charlize Theron in Young Adult, or Charlize Theron in Tully, or blah, 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 blah. You'll need to deal with that. So I advise that you've watched the movies. If not, I'll cut it off at a certain point where I think the spoilers are too much and where you should go watch the movie. But aside from that, this is kind of me just wanting to recommend some movies and sell some movies to you because I think they deserve more of an audience. Now, before we get into that, speaking on this topic of they deserve more audience, I just want to talk about my own personal experience with these movies. So Juno, just came out of the gate swinging, all right? It got Oscar nomination. It was this little film that just served as a runaway success for Fox Searchlight. It's awesome. I think the thing is, though, the other two movies, to me, looked great. But then I remember I tried to get people to come with me to see them, and literally no one would. So with Young Adult, I think I was 13 or 14 at the time. I saw the trailer. I think I liked Charlize Theron at the time. I liked Juno. I saw that it was by the same team. And there was this girl that I was really keen on seeing a movie with. So I was like, yo, can we see this movie Young Adult? And then she watched the trailer and then canceled the date. The second movie is Tully. Now with Tully, so my best friend at the time, I took him to see 3 Billboards a while before. And I remember we were leaving and he was like, oh, it's so good. I would never have seen that if you didn't invite me to that. And now I feel like I know this secret hidden gem. Can you invite me to more indie movies? I was like, yes, I can. So then the next one I invited him to, maybe a few months later, was this movie called Tully. I was like, dude, it looks great. Great cast. It's about a mum that needs help looking after her kids because she's getting really depressed and frazzled. And he went, I don't want to fucking come to that. And then I never saw Tully. So I took some time recently to just watch all 3 in rapid succession. And there's some things you notice that I want to highlight. So first off, Jason Reitmann, the director, has actually come out and said that this is basically a spiritual trilogy. So I'm not just talking out my ass here. The thing that sparked this video was I was going through Letterboxd reviews for either The Young Adult or Tully when I was thinking about watching them, and someone said, with a few changes, I like to think that this is all following the same Juno character progressing through life. Now, the thing is, there is so much you have to change for that to make any sense, but if you sort of just go, oh, vaguely, this is the experience of someone who feels out of place in this world, it's good enough. I want to come on today and mansplain a bunch of female issues and movies about womanhood, but I think they're really underrated. I implore everyone watching to not only rewatch Juno, but actually watch these other 2 movies, because I think if you watch them with someone close to you, or your best friends, or your family, or your partner, I just think the discussions you can get out of all 3 films are really interesting. And that's because I think Diablo Cody, she has a really good ability to take something as nature driven as womanhood and ground them in how trivial and annoying our everyday day-to-day life is. It's so good. So I'm going to go through all 3 and just kind of highlight my favorite bits, why you should watch it, and yeah, the connective tissue. All right, let's start with the massive runaway success, Juno. So Juno came out. Juno was everywhere. Everyone loves Juno. The thing with Juno is it's so popular. Everyone's seen it. It is seen as that kind of big milestone movie, similar to Mean Girls, where it's almost you want to put it on all these greatest of all time lists and all these great coming of age lists. the thing is, for most people, you all saw this when it came out, right? And you were probably quite young like me. And if you rewatch it now, there's just so much interesting stuff there. So when I went to rewatch this movie, I think the plot description on Disney was talking about like, oh, a young high school student, barely 16, gets pregnant to Polly Bleeker's baby and then gets thrown into an adult world that she fails to understand. I think that's the thing. I think a lot of people, when they look back on this movie, they remember that it's like, oh, it's like a high school romance where she gets pregnant and how they deal with that. But it's really not that at all. I think the core of this movie easily, and the most outstanding part of this movie is it's almost like a Trojan horse. You go in for the like quirky Juno character, and then about 20 minutes, 30 minutes in, you get dragged into this relationship with Jennifer Garner and Jason Bateman. They're basically a picturesque couple just completely crumble under the weight of like adult responsibility. I think the interesting thing about this movie is it has a legacy of being like a really quirky, offbeat, like teen movie that like adults kind of don't get the lingo. But it's like if adults watch it, if your boomer parents watch the movie and get through the quirky lingo and like, I don't want to say the Gen Z of it all because it's not Gen Z, I guess it's millennial, right? Get through all the millennial speak and you finally get to the Jennifer Garner, Jason Bateman, Juno, like weird, creepy, uncomfortable dynamic. It's incredible.
Oh, was anyone else a teenager when Juno first came out and thought that Jason Bateman's character was super cool while Jennifer Garner's character was really anal and uptight? And we watched it again as an adult and realized what a creepy loser he is and how awesome Jennifer Garner was. Yeah, just watch these scenes.
That suits you. You're something else. Do you feel like there's something between us? I'm leaving, Vanessa. No?
No, you definitely can't do that.
Thought you'd be cool with this.
You're old.
How do you think of me? You know, why are you over here? Such an idiot. I can't believe what I did.
No, you know? What's going on? Why are you crying? What's the matter? What's the matter?
Just a little hormonal, right? Juno?
What did you do?
I love her. I'm shocked at how differently I perceived this as a teenager.
It's so good. And so I thought that's like the main thing I want to highlight here. Now, it wraps back around. So we will get into spoiler territory. But basically the setup here, Juno is sort of from lower means, right? And she gets pregnant. And she doesn't want to have the baby. And she's very blunt. She's very curt. She's very tomboyish, right? She then goes, I'm going to put up for adoption because she can't go through an abortion. And then she comes across this family that wants to adopt. And they're like from this amazing, gorgeous house, gorgeous Aryan looking couple, like literally like picturesque, right? Like that's the point. And Juno comes in and obviously physically she commands a lot of space and just her personality and energy completely cuts through this like picturesque environment. That's very much clearly the dynamic they're trying to set up.
Your parents are probably wondering where you are.
I mean, I'm already pregnant, so what other kind of shenanigans can I get into?
The thing I love about the way this couple is introduced is obviously this family has a lot more money and a lot more privilege than Juno's family does. They still are just so excited at the prospect of having this kid. Jennifer Garner, anyway, is just so excited and touched that Juno wants to give them their child. They're offering to pay. Juno doesn't care. It's like watching people from two completely different worlds interact. And I think what's so beautiful about the film, and it comes back up in the ending, is that Jennifer Garner's character clearly doesn't understand Juno. There's sort of like this acknowledgement with the audience where you can tell Jennifer Garner is a bit confronted by the way Juno speaks, the way she talks, the way she kind of swears and makes jokes and just says things in a really blunt manner. You can tell that Jennifer Garner probably wouldn't want to hang out with Juno in her spare time. But she's so accommodating, she's so inviting, and she clearly tries so hard to reserve any judgment and just like sort of embrace this miracle. And it's really gorgeous as the conflict between Jason Bateman and Jennifer Garner heats up, because you slowly realize that Jason Bateman is not keen on adopting this baby. But as that conflict heats up, I think the beautiful thing here is that it could have been very easy to make this a story about like, oh, rich people are assholes and poor people are always nice. But it sort of highlights this really beautiful thing where like, yeah, Jason Bateman's a fucking brat, right? Jason Bateman is like scum of the earth, but I think they just paint Jennifer Garner's character in this really beautiful light where when this big conflict arises where Jason Bateman basically reveals that he's not ready to be a father, she simultaneously carries herself with someone who has the respect for themselves and the means to get out of a situation that doesn't work for them. She's still incredibly emotionally in tune and still very grateful, very patient, and very nurturing to Juno in a very interesting way. The bit where Jason Bateman and Jennifer Garner are fighting and he says like, oh, you know, like we put this ad in the paper and all of a sudden she was there and it ran away with itself. And Jennifer Garner goes like, oh yeah, it was amazing. It was beautiful. She answered our prayers. It's like there's no judgment there, even though earlier in the movie you did see that she was very confronted by Juno's demeanor. When she first talks to Juno, she's very insistent on like keeping Juno in their lives. You know, she's very keen on making sure that she gets updates on the kid if she wants to, which is really kind to see because a lot of these tropes you see play out in real life and in movies is that the adoptive mother doesn't want anything to do with the woman they've got the baby from. And so like this whole Jason Bateman, Jennifer Garner conflict that I've sort of alluded to here is what you start to see more in like young adult and Tully. It doesn't seem to want us as an audience to really be predisposed to dislike anyone. We are obviously really disappointed with how the Jason Bateman arc goes. And I think it's also very interesting because a lot of stuff is like inferred and not clearly spelled out. It's never spelled out to us clearly as an audience why Jason Bateman and Jennifer Garner haven't been able to have kids. There's some little like context clues they give. For example, reference the idea that they essentially had a previous Juno, right? They had a previous surrogate mother who pulled out, and they say that's due to cold feet. But then it cuts to Jason Bateman's reaction, and he has this really like sort of scolded schoolboy looking look on his face where it almost feels like he might have had something to do with that. And again, I appreciate that that's never spelled out to us properly. And we see how it then goes with Juno, and obviously that then informs that scene later. One of the most interesting ideas is why they're not able to have kids in the first place. It's very easy to assume it's a complication on the mother's end, and it's really interesting. There's this moment where Jennifer Garner actually says that she always feels like she was like born to be a mother, and it cuts to Jason Bateman. He has this really like arrogant, mean sort of look to him in such like a sensitive moment where it almost feels like Jason Bateman's character is like challenging that idea due to the fact that they haven't been able to up until this point. It just feels really nasty, and it's a really subtle way to show this resentment that's like building. Their big kind of confrontation at the end, I really appreciate. It doesn't go into like Marriage Story territory or like the breakup territory where it's just people really hurling insults at each other. I think Jennifer Garner gets like one lick in, right? Where she says, oh, if I have to wait for you to become Kurt Cobain for the rest of your life before we can have a kid, like it's never going to happen. But like aside from that, it's really interesting just how restrained the scene is. Jason Bateman in this movie is sort of the connective tissue thematically into young adult, I would say, rather than Juno herself. So Jason Bateman's character here is sort of at this like crossroads for himself where it's like he's still clinging to these childhood dreams. He clearly connects with Juno because like it reminds him of his younger self. This is very like on the nose, right? This isn't subtle at all, but like that's sort of what it's exploring, right? And even though Jennifer Garner is this gorgeous, supportive wife that just wants to have kids and will like happily do that with him, he can't get over his own personal failings and the fact that he didn't become what he wanted to be. And that he's willing to tank a perfectly happy, functional marriage for that. The thing is, then we get to young adult, and basically Charlize Theron's character is dealing with the same sort of situation, right? She's still stuck in high school to like an almost uncomfortable, painful degree. Like a famous quote that I've seen pop up on like TikTok and like Instagram a few times, from this movie with Richard Jenkins, where he's saying like, oh, the best kept secret in society is that adults still feel like children, right? Like no one has their shit figured out. But I think that there's a way that you're meant to behave when you start becoming an adult. Jason Bateman and Charlize Theron's characters in Young Adult and Juno, they have this like overwhelming feeling that like the universe owes them something, or like high school owes them something that hasn't been fulfilled. You know, they're like, I had all this potential, I was going to become this, that, and the other. The brilliance of Juno is that, yeah, it sneaks in as like a teenage movie, and then you get probably one of the best marriage relationship breakdowns I think I've ever seen in a movie. It's like, you know, people like this, you can feel a lot of the hidden pain, and it never resorts to these really big blowout painful arguments. It's this really subtle, hard to watch interaction. And I love the scene before that. I think Jennifer Garner is portrayed as just so patient and giving, and she just wants this like useless husband to just get on board even slightly. It's like, he clearly has potential. You get why she would have been drawn to him initially, but it's like he just refuses to grow and change. And like the quote that Jason Bateman says when he kind of addresses the fact that this pregnancy snuck up on him almost, which is a hilarious concept in itself, because it's not even a pregnancy that he has accidentally instigated, right? Like, this is something they willingly advertised in the penny saver. He basically says like, oh yeah, we put the ad in the newspaper and I just thought I'd have more time. And it's like, how much time did you need? And I think that's what's at the core for both this relationship breakdown in Juno and young adult, is this idea of how much time do you need before you accept that life didn't go the way you wanted, and now you need to buck up and be an adult. Yeah, I just find, yeah, that quote there where he says like, oh, and then all of a sudden she was there and I just thought I'd have more time. It's like, more time for what? To piss around all day? Like, what you know what I mean? Like Jennifer Garner goes to work, does everything, and he's like upset that like now he might have to occasionally like help take care of a child. Like, it's just, he's not ready to be an adult, and he's so stubborn about it. And then I think the worst part is then when he comes down, he's like, oh, by the way, I've like called the lawyers for us so we can have like a mutual divorce, as if she's meant to say thank you. It's fantastic. And I think before I continue with the connective tissue, I just want to like close out the Juno section here by praising just how poignant the fact that Jennifer Garner's character framed the note that Juno leaves for her on the doorstep. I've seen this movie like 3 or 4 times. Every single time that gets like a teary reaction out of me. I think it's so sweet, and I think it's sweeter the more thought and effort you put into the movie. If you just go, yeah, of course she likes the fact that like she got a baby, like of course she's going to frame the note. But I think it's sweet because you can feel when Juno and Jennifer Garner and J.K. Simmons' character all meet for the first time. Juno's father, J.K. Simmons, is really trying to sort of get Juno to tone it down, get Juno to not sort of polarize this adoptive couple, right? Because they come from, you know, a silver spoon background, and he's really trying to like almost sort of guide her behavior in a way. And I just think it's so sweet that like Juno continues to be throughout the movie as sort of out there, confrontational, sort of just says it as it is. I just think it's a really beautiful moment that not only is like Jennifer Garner sort of taking Juno in, embracing who she is, not trying to hide her from the baby, but like actively sort of just so grateful that Juno followed through with it, that she's going to like immortalize that note and like make sure that the baby knows who she is. It's sweet, and it's a powerful scene because you don't get to see any of that play out. It is just relying on you as an audience to sort of sit there and understand what it meant to her. And I think it's great. I think a lesser movie would have had some really beautiful speech between these two characters, but they never see each other again. You know, Juno says in the narration, like, I didn't want to see the baby. Polly Bleeker didn't want to see the baby. That's the last time we saw her, you know? And you get this really gorgeous scene where, yeah, Juno is like crying because it is an overwhelmingly emotional experience. And yeah, I think it's such a great choice to not have us see that interaction. Juno might never know that that note is hung up above the baby's crib. but we as an audience know. And I just think it's a really inspired writing choice. Juno's great. We'll leave it there, but the main thing that I think follows through from Juno into young adult is that sort of mentality that Jason Bateman's character had. If you enjoy Juno, I do strongly suggest watching young adult. Now, young adult tells the story of Charlize Theron's character, and basically she just kind of like self-sabotages a weekend away. Like that's the stakes of this movie, right? She's still stuck in high school. She's a mildly successful author, but the series she's been ghostwriting for is about to shut down. Charlize Theron's character is constantly seeking validation. She is constantly trying to be praised, and she is constantly trying to get back to her high school glory days. She's strikingly beautiful in comparison to the people in her town, to the people that she grew up with. The movie makes mention of this. Everyone seems to be jealous of her. This movie's exploring is living in the shadow of your former self. And it's really painful to watch, because I think we all do that for a few years after high school, depending on how your high school experience was. But the thing with Charlize Theron's character is she's at the point where everyone's starting to settle down with families, and she still thinks that she can like close the loop here. This movie embraces just how shitty of a character Charlize Theron really is. Basically, I mean, minor spoiler alert, what happens here is she gets an invitation to a baby shower for the guy she is still in love with in the back of her brain. And she goes, I'm going to go see him. That's a sign that him and I should be together. That's the driving force for this movie. She's not a good person. And I think she knows it. There's so many great, similar to Juno, there's so many great context clues. I love the idea that like she barely takes care of herself, but she's seen constantly. She like wakes up in the morning and will just chug like 1.5 liters of Diet Coke. Like she's clearly got like an addictive personality. She goes from shop to shop, sort of like asking like, oh, do you want signatures for like the book series? And everyone's like, nah, we actually have excess stock. We have to like sell it. And then she'll like get mad at the bookstore. She's like a broken person. So she goes back to town, and like, look, long story short, she's basically spends a lot of the movie trying to seduce this married man that she used to have a high school relationship with. You know, she has the context of like, oh, this new girl isn't shit. She doesn't know him like I do. And it's hard to watch. This is a 90-minute movie. And I think it took me like 4 separate chunks to watch this. It was uncomfortable. I think I lasted 20, 30 minutes each time. I was like, this is a great movie. I need a break from it. And I needed a break from it because there's just no redemption. There's no joy. It is real. It's like bleakly funny at times. It is quite funny, but it's this weird thing where she's not a piece of shit and then you have respect for her. This isn't like Devil Wears Prada where she's like really mean, but she gets stuff done. It's like she's really mean and then she just continues to be dysfunctional. The reason I say this is almost a spiritual follow-up to Juno is they're both dealing with similar ideas of not knowing your place in the world, not feeling like you're ever at the right point in your timeline. All 3 of these movies that we're going to talk about today are exploring that feeling, and that's what Jason Reitmann said in his interview. He said all 3 of these movies are exploring the idea that, you know, you are in high school and you don't feel like you're properly an adult or properly young enough, and then you finish high school and you don't properly feel like you're ready to do that chapter of your life, and then you and then when you finally have a kid, you realize that now, regardless of what you thought you were going to achieve, regardless of what point in your timeline you thought you were, you now need to make sure someone else's timeline is covered. It's no longer about you. And so I think if you watch all 3 of those movies with that in mind, they make for a really, really like satisfying sort of exploration into those themes. But I think young adult is like the middle chunk, right? You've got Juno, young adult, and then Tully. And I think young adult is just so painful. And you feel bad for Charlize Theron's character. And I think it's actually a really interesting choice that they got Charlize Theron to play this character who's basically known for her beauty and just made her so nasty and repugnant and just really kind of like imperceptible as a character. Because as they highlight at the end of the movie, there's like an inbuilt advantage that she still has over a lot of these people just by virtue of the fact that she's like a pretty white, young, blonde woman. She gets away with a lot more. When the reveal happens at the end of the movie, why she's so emotionally strung up on her high school boyfriend, it almost makes you want to rewatch this movie with this awful character, knowing that. It is such a tragic reveal from a character that's just been so unlikable and so nasty that you're then left in this peak moment of the movie going, I don't even know how to feel now. And then the movie just ends and it just leaves you with it. So spoiler warning, I'll put it in the timestamp. Stop watching if you're going to watch young adult and then come back. And then, you know, if you're going to skip this spoiler section, jump to Tully. But basically the big twist, the big reveal of this movie, I guess, is that she's basically been pursuing this high school boyfriend and has been so triggered and emotionally attached after this reveal that he's had a baby, because it turns out that when they were in high school, he actually got her pregnant and she got it aborted, and she basically has this feeling that like there's almost this sense of like owing, right? Like she feels like, oh, if I just kept the baby, you and I still would have been together, and like, you know, that should be my baby. It's just such a tragic, painful reveal with no easy answers. Like no one can fix that. Even if she got the high school boyfriend and they had a baby, like you can't fix that level of just pain and delusion that's been building for like however long she's been out of high school, right? 10, 15 years. And the fact that she's still hung up on it, and obviously events like these aren't easy to get over and they probably will always stick with you, but the fact that she's sort of just been living her life feeling like no matter what, I'm eventually going to get back to this guy and we're going to have the baby that we were meant to have that we couldn't. It's the type of thinking you normally see when like, you know, young girls are like fixated on like Justin Bieber and they're like, oh, I'm going to end up with him one day because we're meant to be together. It's painful to watch, and it's grounded in a movie that is just so like toned down and so reserved and so painful and realistic that when it hits, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, Buddy got me pregnant at 20, and we were gonna keep it. We were gonna have a little baby and a little naming party and a fun aquarium and all of that. And then 12 weeks into it, well, I had Buddy's miscarriage, which I wouldn't wish for anyone. You know, maybe if things were just a little bit more hospitable down south in my broken body, Buddy and I would be here right now with a teenager and probably even more kids, because we always found each other. Always. Right, Jen? Tell them.
And you're not mad at her. You don't find her cringy. It's just you feel bad for someone that has just been horrendously unlikable. And it's just... It's like a master stroke in writing. Like Diablo Cody knows what she's doing. She's a very, very good writer, but good Lord, is it not easy to watch. And so, yeah, I get why I get why this movie flew under the radar. You can't exactly recommend it to people and go like, oh, I saw this great movie, young adult. You gotta see it. Because it's 90 minutes and it feels like 4 hours just because of the quality of people you're dealing with. I think the connective tissue is, yeah, as I mentioned, the Jason Bateman sort of, I'm not ready to be an adult. That's what young adult explores. And what Tully then explores is actually being a mother, being a parent, which is something that Juno never tackled. That story closes once the baby is handed off. But good Lord, Tully, where has this been hiding?
20s are great. But then your 30s come around the corner like a garbage truck at 5 a.m. Girls kill. No, we don't. We might look like we're all better, but if you look close, we're covered in concealer. You're convinced that you're this failure, but you actually made your biggest dream come true.
If you want to run off or something, I get that, because I want to do that too sometimes, but I'm not gonna.
Tully's great. So basically, Tully is like a dark sort of Mary Poppins story, sort of, right? Like the idea here is that like the mum, played by Charlize Theron again, is just completely overwhelmed and drained. She has one son who is severely on the spectrum that she's managing to handle and is getting kicked out of schools. She's got another middle child, and then she's just had her third baby, or is in the process of giving birth to her third baby. And then when she has the third baby, she basically gets so overwhelmed that she hires a nanny. And that's the stakes you're dealing with in this movie. Like, there's no way to describe this movie to someone where it's like a must see. You know, you can't be like, oh, it's this amazing movie where like a mum needs help raising her kids. Like, you know, there's no real quick narrative hook here. There just isn't. Is from what I'm gathering from like all the Letterboxd reviews and all the like articles written about this movie, is just how accurate a look it is into those initial stages of having a child, how draining it is, how difficult it is. This movie, similar to Juno, does a really good job of like sort of highlighting areas of conflict or areas of like emotional turmoil without passing a lot of judgment. The husband character is very interesting. I remember going into this movie, I'd read a lot of reviews that were completely dragging the husband, and there's a lot he deserves to be dragged for. He is quite lazy. He doesn't notice a lot that he probably should, but I think it's really interesting that sort of the big resolution of this movie, minor spoilers, is kind of just the idea that he'll start pulling his weight. And I don't think the movie is necessarily saying he's a bad guy or a lot of what Tully goes through is his fault. It's basically this weird moment where when she has her sort of mental breakdown, psychosis, whatever you want to call it, he basically says like, oh, I thought she was handling it like really, really well. And it's quite interesting because that's actually a lot of what you hear is when people go through these sort of big exhaustion-induced mental breakdowns is that they get this like second wind to basically manage a bunch of stuff and then just crumble. And that's basically what we see. So I think him coming out basically saying, oh, I thought she was doing really well, I actually think isn't him being completely naive or stupid. I think she was putting up that front. Now, obviously, the big twist of this movie is that, okay, so spoilers, stop watching now, but the big twist of this movie is that the nanny is basically a figment of her imagination. They basically pull a Fight Club. Basically, the idea that Charlize Theron's character has summoned the mental energy to basically raise a third child and get through these initial stages of like giving birth basically suggests that, yeah, she would have been putting on a front, right? She would have seemed like she had it all under control because in her head, it was a nanny helping her out when in reality, it was all just her. The husband kind of highlights the fact that like, oh, I never saw the nanny, but it seemed like she'd been helping during the day. I think the father in Tully is really interesting compared to Jason Bateman from Juno because he doesn't seem to have any resentment to the children. He doesn't seem to have any resentment to the mother. He doesn't seem like he's sort of like, oh, I don't want to be doing this. He's just kind of lost in his own world. And then when Tully has her accident, it almost wakes him up and goes, oh, I need to do more. I need to pull my weight more. Like, I'm so sorry. And I actually appreciate how kind and patient the ending here is. But ideally, it shouldn't take a complete mental breakdown and a car accident to get your husband to notice that you're struggling with the kids. Like, I get it, all right? I get it. We shouldn't be begging for the bare minimum this much. But I do actually appreciate that the end of this film isn't laced with a bunch of bitterness, and it actually feels like quite a relief. Basically, the ending of this movie is she gets home to a more unified front with her parenting, a more active, on-board husband. And for a lot of the movie, you don't really think that the core conflict here is the fact that the husband isn't doing enough. And I think I find the ending interesting here because the big pivotal final scene of this movie is this husband that we've only spent like 3 minutes with basically saying like, oh, I'm going to help out around the house more. I want to love you. I want you to love me. I want us to work. I know this gets really hard and I'm going to try and like really pull my weight. I'm so sorry. And I think the interesting thing is the fact that, like, yeah, we didn't know that was sort of the core issue of this movie. It felt like the main plot was just going to be exploring the fact that Tully finally has a friend that she can go to talk about the struggles of being a mother, and she feels like she's recapturing some of her youth. And then the most interesting angle to look at is the fact that this nanny is sort of a figment of her imagination and reflects her younger self, means that really what this movie is exploring is just like trying to find yourself, trying to reconnect with who you want to be and who you are and who you used to be, while kind of the realities of like your actual life are setting in. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting way to explore the idea of what you lose when you become a parent and how you want to sort of recapture that. And for Tully, it's this kind of figment of imagination of reconnecting with like a sort of visual manifestation of her younger self, right? And like how having that younger self energy to get her through things. Interesting, because that does bring up sort of parallels to what Juno and young adult were exploring, where it's like, I don't feel like I'm in the right point in time to be doing what I'm doing. And yeah, I think Tully's answer to that is interesting, because there's this simultaneous like acknowledgement of like, oh, I need some of the energy that my younger self had, and I miss parts of who I used to be, but I also need to use that now to get through and help my current day self. And yeah, so I think all three of these movies just have a lot to offer, and they explore really interesting ideas. And I just feel like if we had slapped A24 logos on young adult and Tully, they would just be way more talked about. So yeah, if you haven't seen these other two movies and only seen Juno, I do implore you to watch all three. Now the other two are way tougher watches. They are. There's a scene in Tully that, until you know the ending, almost feels wildly sexually irresponsible. I was really confused with the messaging, and not like angry at the movie. I was just like, oh, is it really going there? I would have been really interested to see what the reaction at the time was, but then the twist comes around and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. But yeah, I implore you to watch all three of these movies. I think they're great. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and I'll leave it there.